Am I on? Yeah, I need something.
Here we go.
That's what I want. Perfect. And watch this. I will push the button because people that know me know I have an on button, but I don't have an off button. So I'm going to say some things today that I haven't said publicly, nice stuff, research stuff. And the reason I'm so willing to let information go is because the book is done. So I have a book that I wrote 10 years ago, Walking the Bridges Canyon, which I still think is a very good book. And this next book is even better. It's Forging a Sacred Weapon, How a 1946 Mistranslation of the Bible Shifted Culture. So I'm trying to market with Rocky because it's essentially the same project. So we're trying to get people to find both the documentary and the book. I think the book will be out in December, depends on the indexing and all the next steps. But so very quickly, the background behind this book is Ed Oxford and I in 2017 went to the archives at Sterling Memorial Library at Yale University to see if we could look at the translation notes for the 1946-52 Revised Standard Version of the Bible, and to try to figure out if in those notes there would be translation notes for the RSV so that we could try to understand why this translation team put the word homosexuals in the Bible in 1 Corinthians 6:9 through 10 for the first time. So I went expecting to find really derogatory exchange of language in the team. I didn't know anything about translation notes at the time. Now, since then, we've been through 4 sets of them. We went through the NASB, the New American Standard Bible. We went through the NIV, New International, and the Living Bible. And so if you've met anyone that has been through 4 sets of translation notes more than I have, congratulations, it just doesn't happen. So we went back and we went through 94 banker boxes of papers and 22 rolls of microfilm. So we estimate, we don't really know, but at least over 100,000 documents we went through in less than 5 days. So on the 3rd day, going through the microfilms, I found this series of letters. So, and I was just showing Nathan and David beforehand so that you can see how impressive this young man was. Here was his letter to the translation committee in 1959, registering his complaint or his concern that the word homosexual had been put in the Bible and he didn't think it belonged there. So this was going by at, when you're going through microfilms, you go through at sort of a steady pace, but you've still got to be able to read everything. So it was a challenge, right? But there was 1 Corinthians 6 through 9 at the top of this, and I saw the word homosexual, so we stopped everything right away. It's in, Rocky's got the film. See the film, so that you can see some of the action I'm talking about. Because we had film actually from the process of going through the archives and trying to find this. We brought a person that would document on film and pictures things we were doing in case we found anything. And like when Rocky got the film, she was like, this is gold. I mean, I don't know how you ended up with this, because we actually thought beforehand that we might find something, and we did. So what these letters were was David, a person, he signed the letter as David Sheldon, and he questioned the translation team about their usage. First of all, their combined 2 Greek words, arsenokoitai and malakoi, in 1 Corinthians to one word, homosexuals. And it was the first time in the history of the Bible in any language that the word homosexuals was in the Bible. So that's a pretty significant case itself. So the question would be why? So you would not know some of the details of the construction of the RSV unless you'd been through the archives. And because I've not only been to the archives once, Yale University was generous in giving me access to their microfilms, 22 rolls of microfilms every time I asked for them. So in a period of 36 months, I had them for 23 months, but they get interlibrary loans, like they have to go university to university. So I'm about a half hour from the University of Nevada, Reno, And so they mailed them there. And even the archivists at UNR, they were so excited about what I was doing that if they saw I needed an extension, they would even preempt it and ask for extensions for me. Because you can really only get things for 2 months at a time. But sometimes I was getting things for 6 months at a time because librarians were helping me. So I'm yay librarians. I'm very, very appreciative of archivists and librarians. And just another point about archives is we are in an age where we think everything that needs to be discovered is discovered because you can just Google it or ask Claude or ask ChatGPT. Not true. Like this stuff, I will be part of Claude and ChatGPT when I release the book. But this information it's just not public because it's all buried in the archives. And a lot of the information that I'm going to be giving today was buried in very boring sections of the microfilm and very boring sections of the contracts. I mean, who reads the contracts? I mean, I read the contracts because I wanted to really understand the RSV or the process of it. So the original RSV, 1 Corinthians, I'm going to focus on 1 Corinthians 6:9 through 1 Corinthians 6. So 1 Corinthians was assigned to a team of 2 people, and one of those people was James Moffat. The other one was Craig. Can't remember his first name. Craig is the last name. And they are assigned the book, the work had originally started, it was assigned in 1929. They started to do some preliminary work, and then the Depression hit. So the Depression hit, and the National Council of Churches didn't think it was a wise use of money to support this project over here when people were hungry. What a concept. So they stopped work on the translation, and they restarted it up again at the end of 36. So in 37, they had started to assign books to people. 2 people on each book, one head of either the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament at the top of that, and things would have to be approved by that section and then the overall committee. So every translation change had to go through a process. So that's the process they were in. So the first question, this is something I have not spoken about publicly at all, and as I said, because the book is so close to being released, I am willing to talk about it. So exclusive, breaking news. So who offered this translation suggestion? It would have been unbelievably unusual for someone it was finalized in 41, 1 Corinthians. It would be very unusual for someone to have looked at these 2 words that were variously translated, combined them, and translate them into the word homosexuals in 1937. The cultural atmosphere, the landscape of the culture at the time was in the therapeutic community. They don't know what homosexuality is. Is it a moral failing that, I'm going to put it in today's language, is it a moral failing that heterosexuals sometimes succumb to? I mean, yes, they do, but is that what it is? Is it people that are basically heterosexual that for assorted sorts of reasons have this moral failing? Is it a mental illness? Is it a criminal, abusive, rape-type behavior? Is it, nobody would have really started thinking, is this a medical category? Is this a specific category? Yes, people had started discussing that in the 1890s in Germany, and they were doing work within the institute, the Sex Institute that this gentleman named Magnus Hirschfeld founded in 1919. But the problem was Magnus Hirschfeld was a social democrat, a Jew, and a homosexual, right? So like a triple threat. So when the Nazis came in, they did not like the work that any of sexology at the time was called the swine science, because so many Jews were participating in the study of sexology. So of course, the famous pictures you see from the 1933 book burning is from the Sex Institute. That's where those very famous pictures are from. So all this information that's been collecting for 3 decades, destroyed. And the Germans were the only ones doing anything about sex at the time, studying it. The censorship laws were so high, sky high, in both England and the United States. We had the Comstock laws. We didn't let any information on sex come into this country. No information. So when Magnus Hirschfeld came over to the United States to speak about, he wanted to speak about homosexuality, but he couldn't because he would have been shut down. So the way he got around it was when he came and he spoke to Americans, to non-German speakers, he spoke about sex within marriage, and even that was scandalous. But when he spoke to German doctors that were over here, he spoke in German, and so the censors couldn't catch him, and he spoke about homosexuality. So he tried to talk about homosexuality, but now, okay, so he dies, all this information is destroyed, and we're in this void in the 1930s, an absolute void of information. People don't understand homosexuality. So why does this word end up in the Bible? I'm going way over on this, but it feels so good to talk about it. So I'm hoping I get to the end of everything. So anyway, so the head of this team, the head of this two-person team is James Moffat. James Moffat was the oldest person on the team. The team was born between 1870 and 1917. He was the only non-American born person and the oldest person on the team. He was born in Glasgow in 1870, and important point of history, in 1895, that's when the Oscar Wilde trials hit England. Now, there's no way to say how important that was in terms of how the media covered it around the world. It was scandalous and titillating and news everywhere, especially in the UK. Sometimes it made it to the United States, but the language was so coded in the 1800s all the way through, like people that were homosexual knew that homosexuals were getting arrested for things, but no one ever said what this behavior was. So people didn't even know if they were doing this thing. The language was that coded. Indecent behavior, just all kinds of language. So all of that to say, the translation team has no information. They probably don't know homosexuals, and I'm going to use that word purposeful. We don't use the word gay in the culture officially till about 1972. So they're struggling. They have this word. The word starts in Germany. They have this word, but undoubtedly, the translation team of these 50 to 65-year-old academics out of prime universities would not have had relationships with homosexuals because it just wouldn't have been culturally acceptable outside of this enclave that there were gay enclaves around. So they didn't have language, they didn't have relationships, and the other thing that's unbelievably important, if you take nothing away, anyone that has done work before 1978, this is the key line. In 1978, the first accessible academic book on Greco-Roman sexual ethics comes out. 1978. So Matthew Vines and I were talking a couple of weeks ago on the phone, and I said, this is such an important point that I want people to say because it is a dividing line. And I said to him, Matthew, I've got 20 to 30 of these books on my shelf. And Matthew said, I've got 20 to 30 too. Of course, we do the same work. So I asked Claude online a couple of weeks ago, how many books are there today, English-speaking books, on Greco-Roman sexual ethics? And there's 80. When this team did this work, there were none. Because we're also, anything that like Havelock Ellis and a couple of other people, John Simmons, tried to write things in England, they couldn't even get their work published in England in the 1900s. Censorship. Censorship was so extreme. Never look at another time period and think you can apply what you know about a subject or a time or a social attitude to that period. Things change radically, sometimes as fast as 5 years. There's 3-year periods where things shift. And that's why I'm so focused on timelines. Things matter according to time. So they had no information on sexual ethics in the Greco-Roman time. Anyone that did work in the 50s didn't. People that did Bible translations in the 60s didn't. People that did Bible translations in the 70s didn't. But when you hit that magic number of 1978, if you are an academic working in sexual ethics, if you haven't read a book on Greco-Roman sexual ethics, you are either an ignorant academic, a sloppy academic, or one that's doing willful ignorance and doesn't want to know. And so I call that out at the end of the book. Because any revision of any Bible that was done after 1978, if they still have that word homosexual in their revisions, they're bad academics. They're sloppy, they've got an agenda. So we'll get to the agendas at the end. So again, as they're making this decision, it would have been very unusual for someone to suggest the word homosexual. So who the heck did? I believe very strongly it was this academic, James Moffat, Dr. James Moffat. No, and I also want you to very strongly understand, no malice in it, zero malice. They're just trying to understand. So Moffat, he wrote a Bible. He did a translation of a Bible in 1924, the Moffat Bible, interestingly enough called. And so in 1930, and in that, his translation for 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11 was catamites for malakoi and sodomites for arsenokoitai. So a loose translation of that would have been boys who are penetrated and men who have something to do with it, whether they broker that arrangement, whether they participate in that arrangement, we don't know. I have very strong suspicions about what it is, but again, if anyone tells you in particular they know what the word arsenokoitai means, again, bad academic, because we don't know. We can assume from context, we can assume from knowing what's going on in history, we can look around things, but we do not know the meaning of the word. So they take those two words and they combine them into one word, homosexuals. So James Moffat in 1937 wrote a commentary. And I mean, only if you spend a lot of time on Internet Archives is one of my favorite sites. You can find pamphlets and documents and books that are well out of print, and I don't think I would have been able to find this book, so again, bad copy. But 1937, Moffat writes a book, a commentary on 1 Corinthians. Wow, right? So that's probably gold, and it is. So on page something or another, 66 in Moffat's book, he's talking about 1 Corinthians. And he says, just cutting around all of it, the sodomites, or the effeminate, as the Latins call them, moles, were those who yielded to the active passion of sodomites in homosexual love. When I read that, I was shocked, because you don't read the word homosexual in any theological anything, journals, anything before the mid-1950s. It's just not there. I've gone through a lot of denominations, journals, word searching, also just looking for how they interpreted 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11. You just don't find the word homosexual. So to see someone write it in 1937 has got to be quite a clue. I traced it down, and his personal archives are at the University of Glasgow, so through connections, I had one of my archivist friends contact their archivist friends and screenshots for me. It would have been impossible without people being kind to me. And so I've looked at his note. He doesn't even refer to this. He doesn't refer to 6, 9 through 10. It's not a concern at the time. It's just not a concern. So I took that and put it in context that he was also, as a young man, he was the only one living in the UK listening to Oscar Wilde's trial. I mean, it was very much in the news there, so he would have understood it. I absolutely believe it was James Moffat that did it. Not to say he did a bad thing, but the curiosity is always, who brought this to the table? An American probably wouldn't have brought it to the table, but he did. But there's no record that says, and James Moffat brought this word to the table, and this is what we decided. So, just to get that out of the way. So now back to these letters. So that's breaking news. I haven't said that publicly. You may not think that's a big deal, but it is a big deal. I've been reticent about letting go of information for years because I'm also very aware that both the documentary and my work are going to be very challenging to the conservative church. And it will be an imperative to slap this down. And I think I've done a really good job of making it as factually historical as possible. I took the activist part of me and threw it out on a trail somewhere, and every time I sat at the computer, I tried to be just this historian. So there's nothing in the book that said, oh, Jesus wouldn't behave this way, or Jesus wouldn't like that, or, you know, who's the Jesus you're worshiping? Those things don't work. Surprisingly, using the Bible to explain the Bible in these times doesn't work. So I'm trying this other tactic, which I have found over the years really works, of putting information in historical context. So David writes this letter, the Bible comes out, New Testament 46, Old Testament in the whole Bible in 52. And when it comes out, you would think, oh, you know, the gays, the homosexuals are all protesting it, and why is this word there? No, there's almost no attention on it. Because we are also now, we are in the McCarthy era. You know, you've got to look at everything in context of history. And this is where I think the failing has been in trying to engage what these verses mean. So when you go to the other side, they don't engage the context at all. And as I said, I will say it till the day I die. Their academics are sloppy. It's the best word I've got, just sloppy academics. So it's the McCarthy era, and the RSV comes out, and the RSV does something, two other things that no other Bible translation, there weren't a lot of Bible translations. Everybody was using the King James. That was the most popular Bible at the time. So NIV, NASB, Living Bible, none of those Bibles exist yet. They come after this, which is important too. And so when it comes out though, the RSV team, they were good academics. They translated the word Alma in the Old Testament, not to virgin Mary, but young girl, which was more accurate. And then they also said the centurion on the cross said, surely this is a son of God, not the son of God. And think about it. I mean, why would a Roman centurion who knows the world is a pantheon of God say this is the son of God? He said this is more accurately a son of God. Well, that flipped people out, because now we're in the McCarthy era where the communists are after us, and this is a red Bible. Oh, the archives are filled with the funniest articles. People are burning this Bible. They're having church services where they're bringing in a backhoe to throw everybody's Bibles in, you know, their RSV Bibles in there, and all of their bad teenage music that's even out. I mean, they're burying it. One guy wanted to burn it at his altar, and the local fire department said, no, you got to take it outside, buddy. And so people are really reacting to this Bible because they've taken Mary's virginity away and Jesus' deity in the midst of the McCarthy era. I think the chapter is not only very interesting in the book when I have the RSV comes out and the public reacts to it, and I put 4 or 5 of these main opponents to it who were like off the hook driven to destroy this Bible and lying and manipulating, so that none of this is new. So they opposed what the RSV did, and they tried to take it down. So as they try to take it down, other Bibles are responding too. So that's when other Bibles people start saying, that Bible's too liberal, we gotta do something about this. So other people start thinking about that, we'll get there. So the Bible comes out, not much reaction to homosexuals in there. One person publicly reacts in a semi-ish big way. Derek Sherwin-Bailey, he was an Anglican priest in the UK, and why he reacts is because the British are going through looking at their morality laws, and they're specifically using their morality laws in the 50s to target female prostitutes and male homosexuals, and not like heterosexual men having adulterous affairs. So Derek Sherwin-Bailey says this seems to be very targeted behavior, and so he says, what who are these homosexuals in history, in the Bible, in therapeutic settings. So he starts to think about this too, so that he can talk to, it was called the Wolfenden Committee in England, they were trying to figure out what to do with the sodomy laws. So he was off in that direction, but he specifically said, he saw the RSV, his book comes out in 55, whole Bible comes out in 52, and he says, if they don't correct this, this is gonna be a problem. And he's the only one before Reverend David, publicly on record, to say, if you don't correct this error, this is gonna be a problem. One paragraph. There is no indication in the RSV archives that, and they kept everything. They kept birthday cards and little notes and shopping lists of his were in there. If they had seen this warning in Derek Sherwin-Bailey's book, it would have shown up, or if they were concerned about it. They don't seem to, it's not in the archives. But I know it existed. So nobody complains until David writes this letter in 1959. And he basically says, you got it wrong. Never says he's gay, but when I read it, I was only 2/3 down the page, and it's in the movie, I saw he's gay. And because I know history well, like what would people have done? What would people have thought? What would society have allowed in a letter? He never could have written this and said he was a homosexual and been heard. It just wouldn't have happened. So he writes this letter, you got it wrong. Weigel writes back, because I'm trying to get to the translations. Weigel writes back and said, I think you're right, I think we got it wrong. Wow. And then they go and they do this exchange. They do this exchange. Maybe it should be those who participate in homosexual practices. David renegotiates it and says, no, it's not those who participate in homosexual practices, it's those who participate in homosexual vices. Vices, the translation of that at the time would have been rape. And it would have been perceived as an older person or a person in power raping a younger person. So when I found David years later and said, what did you mean? He would have said like a coach with a player, a priest with a boy, an uncle with a child. You know, he perceived it as a power differential and rape. So he was from that time, and that's what he meant. So they have this record, they have this letter on record, and you would think, okay, so why, if Weigel says we made a mistake, it's 1959, why didn't he do anything about it? He doesn't correct it, the team doesn't correct it until 1971 in the RSV updated revision, or the RSV revision. So there's one of those in 71, and they change it from homosexuals to sexual perverts. They don't pick the two options that are in the records. They don't pick those who participate in homosexual practices or those who participate in homosexual vices. They pick this other one, because now they make this decision in 1968. Things are happening in 1968. Things weren't happening in 1937. We are 30 years later. 30 years matter. 5 years matter at this time, but certainly 30 years matter. So they say, we made a mistake. So why didn't they correct it? So in the contracts, in the contract microfilm, there's a series of letters. And the letters, the translation team had made an agreement with the publisher, which was Thomas Nelson at the time. Thomas Nelson had said, okay, we're ready for your revisions, your updates, because now the Bible had been out for, it was 59, had been out for 7 years. They had accumulated criticisms and suggestions, some as small as, you need a comma here, this shouldn't be a semicolon, some a little bit bigger, but there's 300 suggestions they're gonna go through, and I've seen that list of 300, and the word homosexual is not on that list. This was not, nobody complained about this. So in June of 1959, they start sending letters out to the translation team, and they said, no, in April of 1959. And they say in June, we're gonna get together and we're gonna talk about these 300 suggestions, and we're gonna make some decisions so that in that next change, we can incorporate these changes. So then they get together, hey, everybody, we're gonna meet in June. They meet in Chicago in June for 9 days. They go through this list of 300. They agree with the publisher that they will not make any changes for 10 years. And they make this agreement on October 1st, 1959. David writes his letter on October 22nd, 1959. He misses the deadline by 3 weeks. So the correction, although they admit that they have to make this correction, sits in the file for 10 more years. And as it sits in the file for 10 more years, other Bible translating committees and groups are reacting to the RSV, and the word homosexual is still there. Nobody could have, I'm telling you, nobody could have foreseen that this would be as problematic as it is today. Homosexuals, okay, so now by 1959, homosexuals are more problematic. They are, the president has signed an executive order, 10450, against any kind of homosexuals in the State Department, in the Department of Defense, anyone related to any company using the State Department, contracts with the military, any of that stuff going on since the 40s, you couldn't even have a homosexual engaged in that, engaged in the contract. And that was 80% of the money in this country was going into the, we'd like to say, military-industrial complex. It was. And so homosexuals are banned. And it's also criminalized by now. Things have changed. And it's also very suspect. And some of those PSAs are out that we know homosexuals are after little boys. They chase them into bathrooms. I mean, all this stuff is the culture now. So it's accepted. Nobody complains. A couple of gay people, homosexuals, are complaining. I've gone to the one archives at UCLA, which is gay publication history. It's really a really good library. And I've read magazines from that time. You know, they're little magazines that were sometimes banned from coming through the mail because it was still the tail end of the Comstock law, where you couldn't mail, publish, purchase anything that had to do with sex or abortion. Anything there. None of those things could pass through the mail. So to have a publication that would say these things and pass through the mail was near impossible. So very few people would have engaged this subject even in the magazine. There's a couple of people, and it's very tangential language, but nobody saying like, this is wrong, let's have a parade and stop this, you know, from happening. Homosexual doesn't belong in the Bible. Doesn't happen. It just glosses its way through. And by the time 1950, so the team can't, as I said, the team can't do anything about this. The team can't do anything about this until minimum 1969. And when they do the revision on the RSV in 1971, they do indeed change it. But in the meantime, 3 other Bibles have started process. Before I get to those 3 other Bibles, I want to say that at the same time Derek Sherwin-Bailey was writing in the middle 1950s, and the English government was debating what to do about the sodomy laws, how strong we make them, who we enforce them on, these morality laws. A bunch of Quakers. It starts in the Quaker movement. And this, it made me, when I wrote this section, 2 things happened. I'll do the bad one later, but I was so curious about how the Quakers were curious enough to engage this topic as the first ones. So I went to a couple of Quaker services in my town, and I told them, that's why I'm here. I'm here to look at you. I mean, if there's anything I do it thoroughly, right? I mean, I research thoroughly. I find weird books. I just go to the end of a line. So I went and sat with the Quakers for 3 different services, and what you do, that's what you do. You sit with the Quakers. And so there was a rash on Cambridge University campus of male suicides. Homosexual, wouldn't have said it, suspect, but a rash of them. And some of the young friends, which are the young Quakers, go to their favorite professor, Dr. Anna Bitter, who's the zoology professor, 51-year-old woman, and they say, we as young Quakers, young friends they're called, are very concerned about what's happening in our community, and people are committing suicide. And so, can we talk about this? And Anna Bitter says, yeah. They were at her house every Sunday night in the kitchen having Bible study or just get together, so she was their favorite. And so she initiates it after a few years. She has a death in her family. She has to deal with that. But then she initiates this group of 12 people, and they meet for over 5 years, once a month on a Sunday, at the women's library at Lily Cavendish Library because they can't meet at the main library at Cambridge University because a woman couldn't book the space. So they had to go to the women's library, and the last Sunday of every month, this group of people got together and they brought in experts too. People that could talk about what they knew about homosexuality or the history or the medical parts of it. So these were very informed people. And in 1963, they published this book called Towards a Quaker View of Sex. Now, I never would have gotten a hold of this because it's really hard to get a hold of, but I'd mentioned it online on Facebook, and because I'm telling you, the activist and LGBTQ community could not be kinder to me. I ask for something and I get it. I'm gonna put $1 million on that list tomorrow. But more importantly, I got Toward a Quaker View of Sex. Someone found it when they were cleaning out their parents' attic in South Africa. And so she was like, Kathy's looking for this, and she mailed it to me. And it's all marked up. I mean, it should probably be a museum piece, but that's not the way I treat documents. I've got pens and markers, and I'm all over things. And so Quaker View of Sex comes out in '63. It is the first denomination that deals spiritually. I'm not even going to say theologically. That was what Derek Sherwin-Bailey was trying to do. What the Quakers are saying is we have homosexuals in our community that are dying, and we know as Quakers that we are to be inclusive of everyone, and we don't understand this thing. We don't understand homosexuality, but we know what the Bible says. We know what the law of Jesus says about how to treat people. So they engage it, and when they published this in 1963, that's what they come down to is, these people belong in community. We don't know what this is, but these people belong in community. This book makes its way to San Francisco the next year. San Francisco becomes the next hub of Americans dealing with this. It goes to Glide Memorial Church, it's now Glide Memorial Church, Glide Church, and they start dealing with this. Their pastoral staff does, and the pastoral staff says they're running this thing called the Glide Foundation, which is an outreach in the early 60s to kids living on the street. What a concept. And they're finding out that most of these kids living on the street, and they would have understood the term, they were gay or transgender. So they reach out to the gay and trans kids, but they don't know quite how to do it, so they do the next right thing. They say to the gay members of the community, mostly business people, how do we reach these kids? How do we help these kids? So the clergy at Glide Memorial gets together with 14 people from the business community. They go for 4 days up to, if you know San Francisco Bay Area, they go up to Mount Tamalpais, which is a very circuitous route to get to the top. It's very isolated. Once you get there, you're not going anywhere, and that was specifically intended to keep, like, even the clergy there. They couldn't get out. They couldn't call an Uber. You're here to listen to. So they, for 4 days, talked. Clergy and gay people, 1963, talked. And they produced a great document on it. All of this is also on Internet Archives or other archive sites. Again, love archivists, love librarians. Thank you. And so they start this process where a group of Christians start going in a progressive direction. And I really resist in the book using the words progressive and conservative. I call them two different paths. I call one the path of listening and evidence, and one the path of certainty. So this path of listening and evidence ends up with the United Church of Christ, United Church of Canada, the Episcopalians, the Lutherans, up to the 80s, being more inclusive of gay people. So we're going to let that good path go. I'm more concerned right now about the bad path. And I'm going to go over. Are we okay? I'm going to go over. Okay. I actually don't know how to speak in less than hours, but I'm gonna figure this out. We're doing okay. Probably 10 more minutes. If you have to go, loser. You know what? You're just a sloppy academic. Pastoral counseling. Pastoral counseling as a concept starts in 1950. I'll do the fast version of it. I did some of this at our Reformation Project yesterday. So here's the tone again. we've got therapy that is rising. This concept of therapeutic treatment of people is rising. It really only got attention after the First World War. People would have thought this was crazy stuff, but after the First World War, when people saw perfectly normal people go off to war and come back broken, they thought, okay, there's something that's happening in the brain and maybe people can help them. So therapy comes in. By the Second World War, dismiss, we're not stopping, okay. By the Second World War, therapists, the therapeutic community is becoming more engaged in the military practice because they start to screen soldiers. And even then, they don't know how to screen soldiers. At some point, they're even looking at, is their body hairless? Are they slender? Are their arms too long? Are their fingers too fine? Because they don't know how to identify who homosexuals are. So therapists are starting to get involved in this process. You would think this is ridiculous, but I'm telling you this. This is just like, okay, this is weird. I'm going to go back to the 1850s when they were, the sexologists were trying this guy named, Casper, yeah, he's the head forensics officer in Berlin, and they are trying to figure out, our words would be like sexual violence cases, and has somebody been raped? And at the time they really believed, you could spot a homosexual, our words, top or bottom, the penetrator or the penetrated, by looking at, we probably don't say these words much in church, but here we go. By looking at anuses and penises. And the anus of a person that was penetrated would have been funnel-shaped. The shape would have changed. And the penis tip of a penetrator would have been a little spirally to fit in that funnel. This is what they believed in the 1850s. So it's not so crazy in the 1930s, 40s, they're still trying to figure out, are body parts associated with this moral failing? All over the place. So I said, if you try to apply what you think you know about medicine, et cetera, to a different time, you're going to come to wrong conclusions. Absolutely, you're going to come to wrong conclusions. That's why context matters. So pastoral counseling is getting a little agitated because people would come to them, they would come to their pastors pastors or priests, with all of their family problems, all of their mental health, wouldn't have also said mental health, with all of their emotional concerns, and they would have gone to their priests. But now priests are losing ground because this therapeutic community is rising that we don't even know if it's effective. So challenge and like, we don't believe you. And so a therapist, a very popular therapist, starts, he kind of deviates from traditional therapy at that point and says, traditional therapy doesn't work. What really works is confrontation and making people take responsibility for their sins. And he says, I think he ends up being the president of the APA. I'm not going to do too many names in here, but he ends up being the president of the APA, and he says, president of the APA says therapy doesn't work. And it doesn't work for him, because he's been, oh, shocker, a closeted gay man his whole life. And because therapy is not making him not gay, this is the 40s. Nobody understands this stuff. But therapy, as the president of the APA, he has suffered lifelong depression. And his depression isn't going away because he can't make himself not gay. So he says, well, therapy doesn't work. I'm going to go to this kind of religious model of confession, and it's not even just it's like crazy confrontation and confession. And so out of that, a Christian comes along and says, ooh, that sounds good. So he combines therapy and the Bible. And the next progression of that in the 1960s, a guy named Jay Adams, which you probably know this name from pastoral counseling. He wrote a book that was very popular, got published, got reprinted 30 times in many languages, the #1 Christian counseling book. He starts this movement called nouthetic counseling, which means admonition. So that ought to tell you something right away. It's not like compassion counseling, it's admonition, like, stop it. And he was really aggressive. Jay Adams was, stop it. And so his book becomes very popular, but he says, look, this therapy didn't even work for the president of the APA. Therapy doesn't work, only the Bible works. So he goes off on this tangent that only the Bible works. 14 pages in 1961 I think, about how to fix homosexuals in 1961. And from that, the next step is all these Bible translations start. And this is where I'll fly through it. I thought this was going to be my focus. Obviously, it isn't. Bible translations begin. And Bible translations begin because of different reasons. And the main reason is the RSV is too liberal. And why is it too liberal? Because Jesus had his deity stripped and Mary had her virginity stripped. So it's a liberal Bible, it's a red Bible, it's a communist Bible, we need a new Bible. So revisions of or other versions of the book come out. And the first one that comes out is the Living Bible. Kenneth Taylor, president of Tyndale House, which didn't exist, he started Tyndale House to publish this Bible. 1954, he starts writing. He's writing so that his 10 children have, he can read the Bible, a paraphrase that's accessible for his 10 children, more Bible story-ish. And he adds the word homosexual to 5 more places in the Bible. 5 more places. Leviticus, Judges, Romans, Timothy. No, not Romans, Timothy, and 1 Corinthians. And so there it is in the Bible, and fast forward, that Bible becomes the most, Billy Graham gets a hold of this Bible, it becomes the most popular Bible in terms of reading. Most of us, like when I got saved, I was given in the 80s The Way, which is a living Bible. It's just a different version of the Living Bible. And so it becomes the most popular Bible until 2014 was the most popular Bible. So here it is, 6 places in the Bible it says the word homosexual. And so it's handed out at all these crusades. It's sitting right there as a consequence of homosexuality. This due penalty comes when the AIDS crisis comes. It's just a mess. And I can forgive Kenneth Taylor because, again, he did this work in 1963. So I can be gracious. I cannot be I don't have to be happy about what he did, but I can be gracious. But as the other editions come along, the other versions of the Bible, it's really hard to start being gracious. The RSV changes its translation in 71. The NIV, New International Version, comes out in 73, 78. Okay, we're still kind of a cuspy on this because we know they've been working on these Bibles for a while. They started the NIV. They actually started the translation work on the NIV in 1956 in reaction to this liberal red Bible. So Ed and I have been to, Ed Oxford and I, who have done this research together in the archives, we've both been to the NIV, we've both been to the Living Bible, we've both been to the RSV, and he went to the New American Standard. So as I said, I don't know of any other person doing this work on the other side, maybe other is not a good word, on the other side, that has gone and looked at translation notes to try to understand this topic. And so we're going to fast forward to, so the Bibles change. 5 Bibles are out now that have the word homosexual in very prominent places, and the RSV that started it doesn't have it in there anymore. So now you've got this concept of biblical counseling, which says the Bible can fix anything. 1 Corinthians 6:11 says, you know, you should go to hell, but you can get fixed because such were some of you. And I know anyone that has been through reparative therapy, this has been beaten up on your head. And I'm telling you, that's not what it means. It means that you used to be in this pagan world of the Roman Empire where it was appropriate to do these things, including having non-consensual sex with the people under you, your enslaved people, prostitutes, little boys. But we don't do, they still do that in that kingdom, but in this kingdom, in here, we don't do it. We've got a new kingdom. We're building a new community, a new kingdom. We don't do that stuff here. They really can't. Paul never says, how are you going to deal with slavery as a big issue? You're a tiny group of people in an empire of 60 million people, and you are a couple of thousand people. You're not going to change things, but you can say to people, don't mistreat people. don't treat them unfairly, don't be like other people, at least withhold it, because they say 20 to 30% of the empire, 10 to 20% of the empire was enslaved, and that's 5 to 10 million people were enslaved. So people did whatever they wanted. So all these other Bibles are putting the words homosexual in there. So now we've got biblical counseling. We've got 5 versions of the Bible. And we're talking about from the we're going to limit 1970 to 1990. So the next outpouring of this thing would naturally be use the Bible, use the biblical counseling. It clearly says, in 5 Bibles, in many places, that homosexuality is a problem. And the Bible says that God can fix it. So reparative therapy starts. The reparative therapy movement starts. And every single one of those reparative therapy movements that starts in the 70s and 80s, Love in Action, NARTH, Exodus, Love Wins Out, and then Colin Cook's Quest International out of the Seventh-day Adventists, every single one of those fails. And you know what they fail on? The sexual immorality of the leaders, because guess what? They're all gay. They're all gay. And one of my favorite stories is Colin Cook. Don't have time to tell it, but I tend to be driven, and I have called Colin Cook on the phone. I wanted him to repent, but when I called him in, can't remember what month it was, in 2019, through a gay person, said, oh, he was my counselor. He finally got kicked out of counseling because 13 of his 14 counselees that somebody interviewed had all of them had been sexually abused by Colin Cook. And so the Seventh-day Adventists sponsored his ministry, and when they found that out, rather than making a big splash about it, don't let Colin Cook near your gay sons, they quietly let him go. He relocates to Colorado and becomes involved with Focus on the Family, and with the Colorado Family Foundation in 1992 that are trying to pass a law that won't let gay people get married, and Colin Cook is their spokesperson. So it's all a sham. So all of this collapses. Everything collapses, but reparative therapy is only there because biblical counseling, based wrongly on the facts of this gay man that says this works, and in the end he commits suicide, the gay therapist. And because all these Bible translations say it, so reparative therapy has to work. Every one of those collapse, and then everything comes back again. So now we have all these varieties of fixing gay people. You can be gay, you just can't act on it. So we have all these, and I go through them in the book, these 4 ways of dealing with gay people, and they are all based, every one of them, I'm going to say it, from Revoice, which are nice people, to Preston Sprinkle, who's a nice guy. They're all based on bad assumption. The Bible was mistranslated. We'll say that to the day I die. The Bible was mistranslated. And any of these people should have corrected it. So if a ministry or a Christian author or a Bible translation or a seminary teaching is based on the fact that homosexuality is a sin, it's a false assumption from the start. It is not of God. God never did this. People did this. People took the word of God, applied their own anxieties to it, and these things have happened. So everything collapses from the 70s, 80s, and 90s in reparative therapy, and we're still doing it. We are still doing so. Even the people that say, we're going to let gay people be gay, but we're not going to, they can't get married. They're doing what the therapists in the 1940s and 50s, the therapeutic community, they said, we don't understand this stuff. We kind of want to rein you in, but we want to help you with your anxieties. It's a repeat of 1940s therapy that didn't work, progressed, and it's just wrapped in biblical language. So anything, any translation, any book, any author, any person talking about this subject, since 1978, I'll give them 2 years grace, since 1980, that is still trying to impose homosexuality as a sin on this community is a sloppy academic. It has to be fixed. And it is based on bad assumptions wrong beliefs, ignorant academics, sloppy academics, and so that is what this project is about. I really am wrapping it up. So I want people to just engage the facts and the history and be honest about it. There is a price to this, though. When you've got authors and people that have several streams of income and it's all based on this, what happens in the Christian world, we well know. You do anything wrong, they all turn their backs on you and you lose everything. So these authors, publishers, seminaries, we know what happened in Biola. If you even give a nod to the gay community and you go in that direction, if you don't say, oops, we made a mistake, you're going to lose your funding. These are very expensive things to correct. Personal belief, I don't think people have the courage to do it. I think individual pastors have the courage to do it, but if you've got a big empire, you've got a church with 600 people on staff, this is a big ship to change, and you are responsible for 600 people's finances. These are big decisions. But I can tell you who can make these decisions is all of you. It's not, you're not running seminaries and publishing houses. You can do the right things. You can learn. You can start talking to people about what this is. You can start promoting that this is a lie. So bottom line, what I've also learned is I was so disappointed to know that Bible translations, we were taught to respect the Bible, right? As if God really wrote this thing. Well, I can tell you going through translation notes, not the RSV, I'm not looking at them in particular, I'm looking at the ESV, the NIV, the NASB, and the Living Bible and the New Living Translation. They all made decisions based on market share, commercial successes, publishers saying you can't do this, denominations behind them supporting the work. I really am disappointed that this thing that we've been taught to respect has been so manipulated in this topic by people that have concerns more associated with money and reputation than academic honesty. And that surprised me. I don't know why it surprised me, but it surprised me and it disappoints me. So the book is hopeful in the end because the last story I cover, well, one of the last stories I cover is the RSV changed. The RSV in 2022, they did a collaboration with the Society of Biblical Linguists, and they said, we have got to do a new update, which is the NRSV small u, small e updated edition. And they said, we have got to correct this. So one of the things they corrected was now that Bible, that translation of 1 Corinthians 6 says, men who participate in illicit sex, which includes heterosexual men, and heterosexual men do bad stuff too. Being a heterosexual woman, I have seen and heard, whatever. So it's, and then the conservative community was horrified that they took the lid off and let gay people go free, and it's just now about illicit sex with men. But a Bible translation did it. And then they took back all their publishing rights from any other publishing house and said, nobody gets to mess with our translation. Friendship Press, which is part of the National Council of Churches that did this revision, that has owned this copyright, did the right thing. So the fact that pastors are making choices, people are making choices, even a Bible translation did a shift, is possible. It's not gonna come fast, but at least here's what I'm so proud of, is that we found the error. We found that from the beginning, somebody said we made a mistake. And so hopeful, it's gonna be years before many Bibles change, and some Bibles will, ESV will never, I don't think they'll ever change. But, so that's the story, how the word got in the Bible, what came out of it. But reparative therapy comes out of this mistranslation. So much stuff comes out of this mistranslation, which is why the topic is important. So, thank you.